Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I'll review today is Notes of a Dirty Old Man by Charles Bukowski. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Notes of a Dirty Old Man with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Notes of a Dirty Old Man is a short story collection by the enfant terrible of the American short fiction, Charles Bukowski. He was also a great poet, probably wrote some of the greatest American poems. The 20th century Walt Whitman with his brutal realism. Contrary to his reputation of being lazy and a drunk, Bukowski was a prolific reader and a pretty disciplined writer, producing an outstanding amount of literary work. I think this is the case with most great writers. They do the work in spite of their crazy and chaotic lifestyles. Bukowski would drink all night, but at the same time write and produce a consistent output. The writers Bukowski seemed to value, even respect, were John Fontaine, Celine, and Hemingway, but I find him the most similar to Henry Miller. Bukowski was Miller without philosophical reflections. The difference is Bukowski expressed himself the best in poetry and short fiction, and Miller through his novels. Well, the Tropics could be considered modern epic poems. But both of them were great American cynics. Strangely, being somewhat of an American symbol, Bukowski had always more of a foreign following, especially in Europe, maybe because to them, or us, he described the real America, the place and its people, without any pretension at being American. What is Notes of a Dirty Old Man about? It is a collection of reflections, observations, ravings, and denouncement of life at the lower levels of society. Bukowski's views of the workings of America, the illusions and false promises of the American dream. It is often cynical and darkly humorous perspective with a heavy dose of self-deprecation. "Listen, friend," he said, "this whole game is just one big deck of cards. If you want to get into the game, you have to take whatever comes up in the shuffle." A bit of the plot. The plot is a collection of Bukowski's short stories. Actually, it seems one story, a collection of somewhat sporadic notes, since there are no titles nor chapters, and seemingly no beginnings nor ends, just breaks on the page. It starts with Bukowski's routine, getting drunk, a fist fight, and passing out. He wakes up and finds proofs of the fight, so he knows it wasn't a dream, it did happen. The clock says 4 p.m. and he remembers 7:30 was time to go to work, so he says fuck the job. He also remembers playing piano, which he doesn't play, and being complimented on the size of his penis by a man, sticks it inside a woman, and at the same time is sodomized from behind. It seems a recollection of time in prison, where I don't think he ever spent any time. Then Bukowski goes on about poetry, its shortcomings, and the possible reasons for it. "I remember a statement by Whitman, 'To have great poets, we need great audiences.' Well, I always figure a Whitman a greater poet than I, if that matters. Only this time I think he got the thing backwards. It should read, 'To have great audiences, we need great poets.'" Bukowski was pretty critical, mostly of others, but there was some self-criticism as well, just much more vague. Bukowski seemed pretty comfortable in Los Angeles, but when he was younger he traveled inside the country, starting during World War II, when most men his age were at war, but Bukowski was smart enough to get himself out of being drafted. The travels lasted until the early 50s. He would never stay in one place for a long time and would often come back to Los Angeles, probably to recharge. Until one day he made a decision. I don't think I'll travel anymore. Travel is nothing but an inconvenience. There's always enough trouble where you are. Some of his adventures during his travels are featured in the book. I left New York soon after, never went back, never will. Cities are built to kill people, and there are lucky towns and the other kind, mostly the other kind. In New York, you've got to have all the luck. I knew I didn't have that kind. Next thing I knew, I was sitting in a nice room in East Kansas City, listening to the manager beat up the maid because she'd failed to sell me a piece of her ass. It was real and peaceful and sane again. There is a story about boxing which Bukowski really enjoyed, perhaps because it related to drunk fistfights in bars and it made him feel like a man, maybe also because Hemingway was a big fan of boxing, and I don't know if Bukowski considered Hemingway his favorite writer, but he had a certain respect for him. And there is a horse racing story, another one of Bukowski's vices, right after drinking and writing. Well, there were women, but for Bukowski it was pretty accidental. Anyway, he saw gambling from a more philosophical perspective as something that was part of man's search for meaning. Somebody said that gambling was a form of masturbation. I will only say this. The reason the average person is at the track is that they are driven screwy by the turn of the bolt, the foreman's insane face, the landlord's hand, the lover's dead sex, taxation, cancer, the blues, clothes that fall apart on a third wearing, water that tastes like piss, doctors that run assembly line and indecent offices, hospitals without heart, politicians with skulls filled with pus. We can go on, but would only be accused of being bitter and demented. But the world makes madmen and women of us all. And even the saints are demented, nothing is saved. And further down he continues, the reason most people are at the racetrack is that they are in agony, and they are so desperate that they will take a chance on further agony rather than face their present position in life. Further, Bukowski voices his observations on the Kennedy assassination, how it expressed the American culture, its identity with well-defined divisions, and the society's laws being unnatural because they go against nature, and this makes them superficial and selective. And then there are Bukowski's opinions about revolutions, their hypocrisy and uselessness, because in the long run they change nothing. If I am going to kill a man, I don't want to see him replaced by a carbon copy of the same man and the same way. There is also Bukowski's twist on Kafka's Metamorphosis, more comical. A man wakes up in the morning and his whole body is gold in color, covered with green polka dots, and this becomes an obstacle for the man to follow his regular routine. The story is also connected to the extreme case of acne he had as a teenager, how it made him feel. Going back to Bukowski's awkwardness with women, he talks about the difficulty of securing female companion for intercourse. Now, this is mid-July, and I haven't had a piece of ass this year. They laughed and thought it was funny. People who are getting ass always think it is funny when somebody else isn't. The urge makes him desperate, and he starts to dance with an ironing board and says we'll screw it next. And then he gets lucky and runs into a woman whose car broke down, half-dressed, with ugly and old face, but a beautiful young body. Bukowski was pretty frustrated sexually, but started to get some regularly when he got older and became famous. On the other hand, he said that sex was not important. Men can go without it for 70 years, but die within a week without the bowel movement. Maybe for Bukowski, sex was more of a subject for comedy, not a seeming obsession. And then there is anal sex and Bukowski's Brokeback Mountain moment. He wakes up half drunk next to Betsy or Becky, he doesn't know, and decides to slip it up there. And in the middle of the action, the cover slips down, and to his surprise, a bald head of a man pokes out. And the man stayed another 3 weeks, and nobody could understand why. And then the suicides. Writing poetry makes you want to do it, but he says the irony is that he and his other poet friends will probably live into their 90s, because suicides are difficult and writing about them beats doing them. I would go around to the back of the bar and lay down in the alley there. I like to do this because trucks ran up and down the alley and I felt that any time might be mine. But my luck ran bad. And this connects to the stories about going to bars and drinking. Well, all the stories are connected to alcohol, since without it seems there wasn't much to write about, and Bukowski probably did a large part of his writing when drunk. I think he drank to have courage to be himself, or who he wanted to be. Besides drinking being crucial to his survival, giving him the will to continue. Bukowski talks about his parents, his father, what a monster he was, but writes him a letter asking to send him some money so he can get back to Los Angeles. And at his father's funeral, he has a sexual adventure with the father's girlfriend. Also inherits the house and the car and drinks it all away in 6 months, probably to cut himself from the memories of the painful past and be free to exist carelessly in his painful present. Bukowski reflects on his childhood in a story about a frozen man, the regular beatings he received from his father. Maybe he became who he was because of his father, the abuse, and writing was looking for escape and trying to be different from his father. The story is trying to understand who we are based on what happened to us as children. Frozen man also means frozen and not melted. There is his somewhat famous story about losing his virginity to a 300-pound whore, breaking the bed while trying to please her, which was not easy to do. It was his somewhat terrifying introduction to sex, and it seems to have left him a bit traumatized. And further, the story about being married for a short time to an ugly nympho with $1 million inheritance, another traumatic event. For Christ's sake, I'll marry you. Relax. I mailed the letter and forgot about it, but she didn't. She had been sending photos that looked very good. Then after I told her that thing, came some horrible-looking photos. I look at those photos and I really got drunk on them. I do get down on my knees in the center of the rug. I was terrified. I do say, I hereby sacrifice myself. If a man can make just one person happy in a lifetime, then his life has been justified. Hell, I had to come up with some type of balm. I do look at one of those photographs and my whole soul would shake and scream, and down would go a whole beer can worth. And also reflecting on his time as a postal employee and the power the post office had over his life. These experiences led to the writing of his first novel, Post Office. It all begins and ends with the mailbox, and when they find a way to remove mailboxes, much of our suffering will end. Right now, our only hope is the hydrogen bomb, and dispirited as I may seem, this does not quite seem the proper remedy. And man's worst invention has 3 heads: the mailbox, the mailman, and the letter writer. What are my thoughts about Notes of a Dirty Old Man? It is some of the best of Bukowski's short fiction, the early, raw, and authentic, unspoiled by later success, written before the arrival of his commercial aspirations and novels while living on Skid Row. I think the book was published at a somewhat critical time, a crossroad, when Bukowski reached certain maturity in his cynical opinions, but before the spoils of recognition and success. The stories could be described as somewhat vague recollections with blurred lines between fiction and reality. I think what made Bukowski unique was being a pretty common man with a talent for expressing it in writing. The way he wrote about everyday events poetically with peasant sophistication, and all of it presents itself in the right way with just enough fiction added. The mix of suffering and alcohol were Bukowski's inspiration. His fiction was pretty connected to his life, and his life, who he was and what he did, was an outcome of his childhood. When asked by one of his sexual conquests why he wanted to sleep with so many women, his answer was, "It was my childhood. No love, no affection, and I am playing catch-up." And she said, "You're full of shit." And he, "That's why I write." Because he had some, maybe not strong, but interesting opinions. There are too many people afraid to speak against queers intellectually, just as there are too many people afraid to speak against the left wing intellectually. I don't care which way it goes. I only know there are too many people afraid. Many of his opinions might not be considered politically correct, especially now, even offensive, but some of them carry deep truths. Most people simply are afraid to speak, to act, because of the possible consequences. This has been a constant throughout human history, and it has led to some great tragedies. To sum it up, Notes of a Dirty Old Man is a great collection of Bukowski's short fiction, the earlier writings when he was struggling and frustrated, and these stories are the real Bukowski. The fictionalized description of his and general life in America. He was an observer, chronicling what he sees. Bukowski said, "My writing has no message. That has led to some great tragedies." To sum it up, and has led to some great tragedies. To sum it up, Notes of a Dirty Old Man is a great collection of Bukowski's short fiction, the earlier writings when he was struggling and frustrated, and these stories are the real Bukowski. The fictionalized descriptions of his and general life in America. He was an observer, chronicling what he sees. Bukowski said, "My writing has no message, no moral aspect. I am not so much a thinker as I am a photographer." But he admits to adding his own twist. He says fiction is an improvement on life. All of it together forms something we could call Bukowski's philosophy of life. Most of it conceived while under influence of alcohol. Here are some scribblings he did on a cardboard while drunk for 2 days. When love becomes a command, hatred can become a pleasure. If you don't gamble, you'll never win. Beautiful thoughts and beautiful women never last. If you want to know where God is, ask a drunk. I'd rather hear about a live American bum than a dead Greek god. When men rule governments, men won't need governments. Until then, we are screwed. Bukowski, his stories always cheer me up. They are sad, but in an entertaining way. I think he was a perfect example of nihilist and existentialist, but he never cared about any kind of intellectual labels and analysis, and this made him even more so than the people writing about it. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tannery in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I designed the cover, and for this I used a photo of Bukowski drunk and drinking, and I transformed it into an abstract painting. This is the bag with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel. And for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.